Yeah, I mean, I'm just curious. Have you heard about the acronym for helping stroke survivors go up and down stairs safely when they're first learning how to walk?
No.
Yeah, so this, I mean, I don't know if you've heard about it, but when I was in hospital, basically the physio, when I was asking them questions on how to go upstairs and come down, they taught me this acronym. It's gas and sag, right? So gas rises, and and that's basically the acronym you use when you think about going upstairs. And basically what it stands for is good, good leg, good affected, good leg, affected leg, and stick. So you go up with your good leg first, followed by your affected, and then your cane. And then when you come down, it's sag, which is your stick first, and then your affected leg, and then your good leg. I just wondering, have you heard of that?
I heard something close.
Go ahead, Joe.
I heard something close to that. It just said that, it was brief, a little shorter than that. It was just, you're going up to heaven. The good.
Yeah. The good.
Mm.
Is it the one where it goes the good leg goes to heaven, the bad leg goes out, something like that?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. So it's a similar concept.
Yes.
But this one that the physio. So I've heard both, but this one, which the physio told me, she said that the reason why it works is because gas rises and obviously sag means to come down. But
Well,
I mean, they both work.
Along the same lines, what you had put on Facebook, William, was when we're getting back to the pool, was that the brace, people were asking you about a brace for their hand, to keep their hand unclenched in that flex position. Was that this okay to a point, but the actual function of recovery will be interfered with when your muscles aren't actually doing it, when the brace is doing it.
Oh yeah. That was a post on Facebook on one of the groups, I think.
Yeah.
A long time ago. Yeah. So my whole perspective on that is because when I was going to OT school and when I was studying occupational therapy, the reason why wearing a brace is so big is because this occupational therapist back in the 1980s, back when there wasn't a lot of knowledge about neuroplasticity and how the brain recovers after stroke, she thought that it would be a good idea to, rather than actually stretch out the muscles, give people a brace to wear all the time so that they could stretch it while they were sleeping. And obviously the idea sounded good on paper because from a logical standpoint, it sounds a little bit too good to be true in that you can just be sleeping and stretching out your hands out. But now they've done a lot of research on that, and the evidence has come back that wearing a hand splint, a hand brace, sorry, it actually doesn't do anything in the long term. But rather, they've done studies where when you actually stretch out a muscle, so when you do the weight bearing stretches, where you're pushing down on your hand on a table, what happens is that when you stretch out that hand, the muscles which are being stretched, they send a signal back to your brain, telling your brain how to contract those stretched muscles or send signals to those stretched muscles. And that's actually more beneficial because you're actually teaching your brain how to regulate those signals, because the reason why tightness and spasticity happens is because your brain is sending too many signals to muscles, making them want to turn on more than necessary. And it doesn't know how to relax them and regulate these signals to, I guess, relax your hand and make it more open.
So along those lines, that's why the pool isn't. I think the pool should be supplemental, because that's something like Rob was saying. He did that every third day or something, but the actual therapy takes place in a real environment where you have to walk and balance.
Yes.
Well, but
Yeah.
I also found that One of the things I did with another guy was trying to get rid of his AFO, and he would do counter exercises with a grab bar without it, with me supervising, making sure his ankle wasn't rolling, and he could walk in the pool without his AFO. So it was pretty beneficial in
Oh,
terms
yeah.
of patterning. At least
Yeah.
there was a time he couldn't do it on the land, but eventually did. But
Hmm.
there was a time when he could do it in the pool and he couldn't do it on the land. So I'm not a physical therapist, so I just have to observe. And it seemed to me that by observing that he was spending time in I guess I think of them as zones. He was walking without his AFO, so his brain was getting some exposure as to what that feels like. And then when we
Yeah.
got around to, I made him build it up because I didn't want to have a twisted ankle on the land. So I gave him certain goals at the counter, and then we started. He wanted to get back into therapy, and they told him he had to walk 70 steps. So I said, "Now we're going to walk 100, and then I'll send you back in." And he did walk 100, and he got back in therapy, and I kept walking him too. But eventually we got to where he could walk without the AFO, using a vertical walker, because we kept working on ankle strength and things to counteract the roll.
It's a perfect example of how that our personal therapies and our personal recoveries are they're custom made. And that's just how it has to be.
Well, everybody I've worked with is different.
Yep.
At that time, I was working with two people who both, one was a year older than me and one was a year younger than me. And they both wanted to shed their AFOs, but they were completely different experiences. For me, first of all, I was scared with both of them because ankle rolls can be dangerous. I mean, you can roll your foot and break your ankle.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point, what you raised about the pool. And I think, Joe, you said something about making sure that you're in the right environment with your brain. Yeah, I think if you can, like, I think there are some exercises out there or some exercise techniques where you can put your brain in a certain position, or you can put your body in a certain position or position your hand in such a way so that your brain is able to do something which it typically can't in a normal position. So, for example, some of you might have heard about the exercises that you do while you're lying down on bed, where you're doing circles or lifting up your arm like that. So, typically, the people who do that are people who can't do that while standing up. But the reason why therapists suggest doing it on the bed is because what happens is that the back of the bed, it actually stops your brain from wanting to compensate with your entire upper body and your trunk. And it becomes a lot easier to turn on those muscles which you typically wouldn't be able to when you're standing up and you're working against gravity and you're wanting to compensate. Who do that are people who can't do that while standing up. But the reason why therapists suggest doing it on the bed is because what happens is that the back of the bed, it actually stops your brain from wanting to compensate with your entire upper body and your trunk. And it becomes a lot easier to turn on those muscles which you typically wouldn't be able to when you're standing up and you're working against gravity and you're wanting to compensate.
So it's a form of like blocking.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's just one of the forms.
Right, there are a lot of them. That's one thing I think that we should eventually explore with Edmund, because I think don't you have some experience with various kinds of blocking or not necessarily blocking, but isolating muscles. It's the same thing, keeping the wrong ones from overcompensating and trying to focus on the right ones. That would be a real good.
Yeah, there are. I mean, there are a lot of techniques I mean, one I personally teach to my clients is, you know, if you're lifting up a ball and you can't drop it, one thing you can do is you can actually push the wrist back. And what that does is that gets rid of the tightness because you're stopping the muscle which you use to flex from turning on as much, and you're allowing the muscles which you use to open to lengthen out.
That's
Because
right.
the muscles. Yeah, sorry, Edmund, go on.
That's right. That's right. It happens to me too. When my hand is straight, it actually gets very tight. When my hand is relaxed,
yeah. So basically, if you're in a okay, so I've done this multiple times and it's worked. So if you're in a situation where you're trying to pick up a ball, and then you're in a stage in your recovery where you're trying to drop the ball, where you find that you're having to shake like this or do funny stuff with your elbow or your shoulder, one thing you can do is you can push your wrist back at that point where you're about to drop the ball. So if I had the ball here, imagine I've got the ball here and I can't drop it. What you can do is you can push the wrist back, and what that does is that puts your hand in a position where the muscles which you use to make your fingers curl in aren't able to turn on as much as usual, which allows the muscles which you use to open to relax, to work a lot better. And by pushing your wrist back, what you can do is you can give your brain that experience of what it feels like to relax the muscles which are used to close, so that you can give it that experience or exposure to what it feels like to relax the fingers so that you can eventually open. It's kind of like the have you guys heard of the Sabo sort of thing?
Yes.
Yeah. So the Sabo thing works on a similar mechanism, but they've got it all wrong because theirs is like that. And in this position, it doesn't work as well. In this position, in fact, the muscles which you use to flex, they actually work a lot better. But the muscles which you use to open your fingers, they don't work so well because they're still having to overcome that resistance. Whereas if you think about, actually, I think I messed up the explanation, but have you guys ever watched baseball, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so you know when someone's pitching the ball, right?
Yeah.
So what actually happens for the ball to actually leave their hand? It goes, when they first lift up the ball, it's like this, right? They grip it like that. And the reason why they grip it like that and why we grip it like that is because in this position, when your wrist is up, it's a lot easier to turn on the muscles which you use to flex the fingers, because the muscles which you use to flex the fingers, which are on the forearm surface of your hand, they're in a lengthened position. So you're able to recruit them a lot more. But it's obviously a lot harder to open your fingers like this. So if you go like this, and okay, I'll start again because I've done this a lot of times, but for some reason I can't explain it today. But basically what I'm trying to say is that in certain positions where you move your wrist, the muscles which you use to flex your fingers, they can't work as well compared to other positions. So when you think about a baseball player when they're pitching, what happens at the last moment is that their wrist goes from here and it drops like this. And the reason why it drops like this is because so the fingers which you use to flex, they naturally want to relax like this in this position, allowing the ball to come out. So if you do a test here with you right now, Joe or Edmund or Ralph, if you want to do this.
Yeah, I was
So
doing
do a test here now and extend your elbow out as far as possible, like me. No. So use your non-affected, all right? Because it's
Okay.
So use your non-affected and go like this. Okay. And now I want you to try and flex your fingers. But make sure your wrist is like locked at 90 degrees like this.
hard.
Does it feel difficult to flex your fingers?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It does, right? Okay. And now, while keeping your wrist locked like that at 90 degrees, try and open your fingers. Does it feel easier? It feels quite easy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mhm.
So that's the whole idea. what you're doing with that trick is you're putting the hand in a position where it's a lot easier to turn on the muscles which you use to open your fingers, and because you're taking away that resistance and that tightness caused by the muscles which want to flex in.
I noticed that with my arm when I try to flex my affected arm, when I try to flex that wrist, as soon as I start coming back, my fingers just curl right up.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Because when you come in this position, what happens is that the muscles which you use to flex, they're actually in a position where you can turn them on more. But the muscles which you use to open, they're actually shortened, right? So it's kind of like a rubber band. It's a lot harder to open your fingers in this position than it is to open your fingers in this position where it's like that.
Right.
Which is why a lot of people, when they want to grab a ball, when they want to try and grab it and they try and open, they use so much effort to do this that it ends up flexing in.
Right.
Because they're putting themselves in a position where they can't turn on the muscles to open as much. And because the muscles which you use to flex are so strong, the default just goes like that, because the muscles which you use to open, they can't overcome that resistance. Whereas if you're picking up a ball and you do it like in a crane motion like this, starting off like this, and you try and grab it, you'll be able to drop the ball a lot better because you're putting the hand in a position where the muscles which you use to flex in your fingers, they can't work as well, and they can relax a lot better because of that positioning.
Well, that's how I can see the improvement in my affected hand as those fingers, as I develop more control, I develop notice my index finger and my middle finger, they'll stay open a lot better. The little finger, ring finger, they just curl right up when I start getting enough dexterity to be able to move my wrist up. That's the struggling. That's the struggle zone for me.
Yeah, exactly. But that's because you can flex your fingers, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's because naturally the muscles which you use to flex your fingers, they're quite strong, and because the brain tends to send more signals than necessary after stroke, it's probably sending too many signals to flex, and because the muscles which you use to open, they can't overcome it.
Right.
The default is just to go back like that, especially in a position where it's like that.
Especially.
That's what happens. But one way to reverse this is to do that trick where you force your brain in that position and to work on those muscles which you use to open, however much you've got in that opening.
It's like so much better than when it was flaccid, when I first started. But as it slowly starts to come in, it's one digit at a time. It's one finger, one knuckle, and it's slowly getting better.
I wanted to drop back because all of us understand this, and I'm worried that somebody in the listening might not understand why you would want to isolate a muscle or why you would want to work on opening your fingers in a position that it's easier. It's not that we want to walk around, like releasing things with our wrists bent for the rest of our lives. It's got to do with the purpose in blocking or isolating or working on a specific thing is that you can make pathways for that one type of connection. Edmund, you in your conversation with William the other night that the three of us had, you were talking about how you isolated muscles, and then what you have to do is put them all together. Like when you walk, they're, oh my gosh, just your ankle goes from heel to toe to push off, and and you got to bend your knee at the right time. There's a whole bunch of stuff, but you can't get there. It's like use a symphony. So imagine like after a stroke, everybody's playing a different tune. It would sound like horrible, and that's what your walk would look like.
Right.
And what by isolating, you're in a sense giving each of the musicians a part, and they can learn their part, and then they can play together, and it won't sound, and walking will be better. So anybody who doesn't understand why we're talking about all this muscle isolation and things, it's because once those fingers, I've heard people say that started with a pinky and the last was a pointer finger. So I think maybe you're, I don't know if you're luckier, but we use these first fingers more than we use the pinky, so maybe. And it's kind of following the bigger to smaller thing. Of course, there is no rhyme or reason in this, because I got my hand back, and then my wrist, and then my elbow, and then my shoulder is supposed to go the other way. I had my hand back in a couple of months. It took me 15 months to get my shoulder all the way to do that.
You were also working 10 hours a day.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
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 Caught. Well, I think I felt very much like Edmund feels now. I can't speak for him, but at some point, we were talking, Joe, you and I were talking about rest. If I pushed through a lot and I didn't seem to require a lot of rest, but I understand that, people say, well, how'd you get, over the neurofatigue? I said, well, I just kind of ignored it, and I kept, I took video jobs, and I worked, and I showed up, and but not everybody can do that. So you have to factor in the whole rest thing into what's good for you. It's back to listening to your body. But I guess I felt like up to a point, the more I did, the better. But since I know a training program, you can't go do one thing. We all four know this. You can't do one thing all the time and expect to be good at it. That's why I mentioned earlier mixing stuff up, using different muscles, working on different things.
Even in the recovery process, I use the old acronym that I had when I was training as a weightlifter, and it was NERM: nutrition, exercise, rest, and motivation. Those four legs keep the table stable, and they have to be equally distributed. You have to have all of them in concert with one another to achieve whatever your goal is.
I mean, what I was saying to Ralph before in the group chat, basically to move your arm, right, you need to start bending your arm. So that's the biceps. You bend your biceps. The next thing you learn is to straighten your arm, the triceps.
Right.
So when you learn the biceps, you train the biceps to bend, and then you train your triceps to extend. That's the opposing muscle. You go by opposing muscle theory, the other way around. And then you train your shoulder to press the shoulder. Which also, if you do it the other way around, is to lift it up. You can lift it up. So that's what I do is I train the muscle basically in one function. First, you start with one function, just up, up, up. Then you go down, down, down. But of course, after that, you need to do some stretching like that. Stretch.
Yeah, that's right. I think the whole discussion we were having the other night, I think it must have been 12 o'clock your time, Ralph.
At least.
Yeah. Yeah, but basically we were talking about how, every exercise and everything you do in stroke, it's just a piece of the puzzle. It's just a small piece of a puzzle of a giant thing you can't see. And everything has to work together as a system to work. And that there's no one exercise which is going to help you complete that puzzle ever. You're only ever focused on one piece, and there's an infinite number of pieces, obviously. And it's only as years go by with the hindsight that you can see how that one piece or how that one exercise maybe you worked on for like half a year was so important to the whole bigger picture of your recovery. you know, if we're going to go with the puzzle metaphor, which is how I think of it.
Yes.
Well, it's back to why you want to do the isolation and blocking and learn to make those direct connections before you go putting multiples of them together. Because it's real hard to make when, you know, well, your brain's going to always take the shortcut. That's why when you go to lift and you can't lift, you lift with your shoulder.
Yeah.
You know, and, you know, you have to learn to just lift.
Yeah, that's right. That's like doing a puzzle, but getting multiple pieces and sticking them together and completing it without referring to the bigger thing.
Yeah. Well,
Whereas, you know, if for those of you who have done puzzles before, you would look at the picture and then you would collect all the correct pieces and then build like a little segment. And then you would build from there, right? So I think thinking about that and how it relates to stroke, it's a really good thing, because if you can focus on one exercise and see how it relates to the bigger picture, so you look at it and you zoom out to see if it's relevant to where you are in your recovery, and then you zoom back in and work on it, then that will be a lot better than searching for that one thing which is going to fix everything, because it doesn't work that way.
The puzzle is a good analogy, because I think a lot of people get the outside of the puzzle with the edges. And
yeah.
And then when it goes to filling in the middle, they get kind of lost, because the edges are pretty easy. You know, you got that straight edge, you know, it's a square or a circle or whatever. But filling in the middle is, you know, the harder part.
Well, that's
exactly.
That's the key, I guess, is to really identify where you should start. If you get your edges, where should you start? How can you identify what needs to be worked on for you in particular, the of your unique stroke? What, you know, is it that's where it becomes unique? Do you want to work on your arm? You want to work on getting that walk or fixing that drop foot, or what you know, how would you identify, and then how would you go about getting feedback to see if you're making headway?
People in my recovery and the people I work with, we kind of worked on all three. I tend to look for where they're weak and trying to accentuate, you know, do more work on where you're weak. And, you know, when you know, you go to somebody's house for a couple of hours a week for 6 months or something, you get to be, you know, friends with them and stuff. So I always, you know, I joke with people, guys and gals, you know, go, oh, you're not very good at that. I think you have a lot more of them in your future. You know, because how do you get better at something that you know, you try and identify the things that you can't do, and then you try and learn what exercises will help, either by reading, asking your physical therapist, screwing around yourself, and then, you know, once you have that, then you can work on it. Once you can do it, then you can check that one off the list and grab a new one to work on.
Right.
There's always a pile of them.
As William said, it's infinite number.
Yeah. And, you know, I think a puzzle, I mean, what you said about making the borders first with a puzzle, that's a really good idea, because I think you can become very narrow-minded in stroke when you're focused on that one thing. But if you can always look at what exercise you're doing and how it relates to the big picture, that will be a lot better. Otherwise, you might get caught up in this idea that this one exercise is going to cure everything, without actually having a look at how it relates to, you know, the big picture of what you want to achieve, and the other components which would follow that exercise. You know what I mean?
It's this puzzle thing's interesting, because see, you pick up the box top and you can see what it's supposed to look like.
Yeah.
course, that's true with like you know your strong side and your weak side. You know, you can always, if you want to know what this side's supposed to do, look over here.
Yeah, I mean, you could even apply that puzzle thing to the whole idea of using your non-affected as a reference point for your affected. Yeah, it was just something I thought of, but I just figured out that, hey, given that you mentioned that, you could that puzzle piece metaphor, that's actually a really good one for stroke.
I think if you ask a lot of stroke survivors, they'd tell you that they feel like they're putting together a puzzle and they don't have the benefit of the box top of the lid to see what it is supposed to look like in the end.
Yeah, that's right.
That's true.
Makes
True,
it more,
that's right.
more difficult. So you do it like you do a puzzle. You find all the white stuff. You know, I
Yeah.
go colors and patterns and things. I start putting all the white pieces together, and I go, oh, okay, well, these all go together. These don't. So there must be another white thing. So you put all the white pieces that didn't fit in the first one over the side, and sooner or later, you know, you start getting like little things that you can fill in the edges with. And I think it's the same way. And it's a real good analogy because a lot of people don't have the patience to put together a jigsaw puzzle.
Yeah, true. And I mean, everyone's got different styles. I mean, some people like to work on one section and then they like to build another section. Some people don't even start with the border. They just do whatever.
Right.
They don't even refer to the whole big picture. They just put it together like they would and just try and build it without looking at the thing. And just try to figure it out on their own. Maybe it's because they've got pride. I know some stroke survivors have that pride. Maybe they feel like they can keep doing research and they can eventually find the magic thing when the solution's right in front of them and it's in front of them in the mirror.
Yeah, well, you know how I feel about that. The solutions within each of us. Yeah, it's right there in front of you.
I think the important thing is that we have the access to people like yourselves and all of you gentlemen, and the people like Dr. Tobias, where I can understand why I want to stretch and why and how I should do it, and what comes from that, and the specific muscles, the specific movements I'm doing, and stretching to loosen up the muscles that are contracting and forcing my shoulder down, so that my shoulder will begin to eventually move on its own, so that I know why I'm doing what I'm doing. Why? It's the why that matters to me, that so I can have some understanding of exactly what it is I will achieve if I keep doing this.
Yeah, that's
go ahead. I was just saying her videos are very good, and she does a good job of explaining things, which I'm not comparing myself to her in any way because she's a neuro-trained physical therapist and I'm not. But I think it's important to explain things to people, and I try to not only explain what it's doing, you know, what muscles and why that's good,
Right.
But also, you know, try and relate it back to the bigger picture, which is the puzzle again.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
So go ahead, William.
Yeah, I mean, I totally hear you, Joe. I've heard from a lot of stroke survivors. I've got one stroke survivor I'm working with, a client of mine. She says that, you know, when she went to therapy, she never knew why she had to do stuff. She always went to a therapist and they would just tell her to do an exercise and go home and see how she would go. They didn't set up the expectation that, you know, next week she would be able to see this change, to let her know that she was on track. But rather they would just give her. I think I've told Ralph this before, or maybe it was someone else. But basically, the way I like to think of it is, when they go to the therapist would just give them a snack from the pantry, and then they would just close the pantry.
Mm. Yeah.
And I think the reason why people don't know why is the reason why this whole stroke market is filled with a lot of these silver bullets and magic fixes, because no one knows why. and they're so desperate to know why, they'll be willing to fly across the country to get an injection, which costs like $10,000.
Yeah,
Yeah, and
yeah,
and combine that with the people and the brain always want to take the easy way out.
Yeah,
It's human nature.
yeah. And also people thinking, there has to be another way. I just haven't figured it out yet.
mm,
Well,
no. It's all about the puzzle.
Yeah, but again, if you have the picture of the puzzle and what it looks like, then you won't have to ask yourself, there has to be another way. You just refer back to the roadmap or the puzzle piece, and then you'll find your answers there.